Hello and welcome to this webinar titled Finding the Common Road to Quality for Single-Use Materials, hosted by Biopharma Asia magazine and presented by Dr. Trishna Ray-Chaudhuri, Senior QC Scientist in Direct Materials in Global Analytical Sciences and Technology at Global QC at Genentech, and Dr. Helen Porra, Vice President of Technical Communication and Regulatory Strategy at Pall Biotech. My name is Ursula Balogh, and I will be the moderator. Before we begin, I would just like to remind our viewers that there will be a live Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Audience members can send their questions at any time during the presentation via the Questions tab located at the right-hand side of the screen, and we will go through these at the end of the webinar. Now, please allow me to introduce our first presenter, Dr. Trishna Ray-Chaudhuri. Dr. Chaudhuri is the Senior Quality Control Scientist in Direct Materials in Global Analytical Sciences and Technology and Global QC at Genentech, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Roche in South San Francisco, California. Since 2011, she has been responsible for supporting the implementation of single-use systems in terms of system performance and reliability through specification development. Before joining Roche, she was an independent consultant providing support in the development of single-use systems. Prior to this, she was Senior Process Engineer at Sartorius Stedim, working in the development and implementation of single-use systems. Trishna started her career in Monsanto Plastics prior to its acquisition by Bayer. Trishna has a PhD and MS in Polymer Engineering from the University of Tennessee and a BS in Chemical Engineering from Rutgers College of Engineering. Welcome, Trishna.
Thank you, Ursula. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. Today, I want to share with you my experience over my career from starting in a chemical company where I polymerized and formulated plastic resin pellets to producing film and molded parts and integration of parts to final single-use assemblies. With this presentation, I hope to provide you the key quality performance requirements to consider for single-use assemblies that can help you implement it seamlessly into your process. The quality requirements for single-use systems have many common requirements to stainless steel. However, the control of design, fabrication, release, and quality testing is all being done by the suppliers of single-use. This is a huge advantage for us as end users to consider the use of single-use systems. However, the supplier must understand our needs to meet health agency requirements. This presentation will provide the common quality and GMP requirements for single use as compared to stainless steel tank. I will show you what has been developed mutually between the end user and the supplier for improvements in the requirements for the single-use assemblies. These requirements are based on the functionality, technical, quality, and supply chain for the single-use consumable. What is the contents of the talk? We're going to start off with the objectives, and then I'm going to talk about the requirements of single use in the commercial operation per the control of supply chain, understanding the materials, being able to meet the expectations of our agencies, and where are we now? What is the objective of the talk? It's to review the common quality requirements for single-use materials compared to the conventional stainless steel tanks that we all well know, and also to get the general expectation of the GMP requirements for single-use assemblies. And finally, the progression towards improving the communication requirements to suppliers. Before we go any further, we all understand GMP well, and we need to understand GMP requirements touch every single-use assembly used in clinical studies to commercial manufacturing. The drug product produced in clinical studies are given to patients. Given GMP practices followed in producing single-use assemblies will ensure that there is no risk to patients in clinical trials and future commercial products. We expect the highest quality in the production of these materials. And if we cannot prove that single-use materials were made in a GMP environment, single-use assemblies will not be accepted by regulatory agencies, and internal quality departments will tend to go towards the alternative to stainless steel tanks. The perception will continue if there is inadequate quality controls on single-use assemblies, as GMP practices are not adequately followed, and this will inhibit the implementation of single-use. The new reality. When we implement conventional stainless steel tanks, everything is stable and known. There is a massive amount of efforts to validate one system. We have a complete understanding of the materials that are used, the manufacturing environment, and the key practices to produce the stainless steel tank. However, we validate the cleaning of a tank each time prior to use. When we replace the conventional system with a new single-use system, it must provide equivalent levels of assurance. As you can see, a single-use assembly, the end user's control is diminished, while we are accountable remains exactly the same, our accountability, which can be unnerving to say the least. The supplier now is responsible for manufacturing sterilization, but we remain accountable to the regulatory agency. Therefore, when the supplier and end user have different views of the requirements of validation control, then there can be a problem, potentially a risk to commercial manufacturing, leading to batch loss, product hold investigations, and a number of other issues. This can be mitigated by considering that there's a common road to quality in design. This entails the understanding of material science, engineering reliability, and the supplier capabilities, all contributing to the highest quality of single-use materials to be used in processing. Between the engineering reliability of the system is a shared activity between the supplier and the end user. This can be mitigated by considering that for end users to adopt a single-use component or system in a commercial manufacturing process, we must be able to prove a number of things can be confident to a level of stability and control. Suppliers ask what is required. We need to have a control of the supply chain so the end user can understand how the product is made, measured, and release tested. Well-defined materials so the end user had confidence that the product won't negatively impact the drug product or process stream. Meet agency requirements. There is no exact agency requirements for single-use assemblies. However, the agencies have deemed that the end users must ensure that the supplier quality system will deliver adequate and sterile assemblies. First, we will look at the control of supply chain. As an end user, we need to have complete understanding where and how each of the components are produced and the quality requirements used to release these materials for use in the single-use assembly. Control of supply chain is critical to avoid shortages or stockouts that could produce drug shortages for our patients. Film product quality. Currently, single-use assemblies are released for use by review of C of A. We need to understand how the film and bag is produced so the end user can prove that it is fit for use. We do the same for producers of stainless steel tanks, and we audit them accordingly to confirm that they claim is correct. Agencies ask us how stainless steel tanks are made. Similarly, they ask us how films and bags are made. It is critical for us to be able to describe the supply of the plastic resin to film production, to the bag making and final assembly to the agencies. This is expected by the health agencies. As end users, we are experiencing an increase in questions from agencies on single-use assembly manufacturing and QC controls. As end users continue to release based on C of A, the agencies want to ensure that we understand the complete process of production and complicated raw material supply chain. If the end user can't do this, the agencies will start to require release testing of single-use systems by the end user. and this will defeat one of the advantages of using single use. It is not just the bag, but it's also the components that are of concern. We have to be able to demonstrate to agencies that single-use components are fit for use. There needs to be complete understanding of the exact sub-supplier of each component, the material of construction used in the component, the environment in which the component is produced, and finally the QC release criteria at the sub-supplier. For example, we need to know that only virgin materials are used and no regrind plastic. There is no problem with bioburden or endotoxin. We need to understand how the QC release is done, and again, so we understand that it's fit for purpose. We look at traditional stainless steel tanks where there are lots of checks done after they have been built to ensure that they're fit for purpose, and this same rigor will be required for single use. Let's look at the end user's need for the suppliers to adequately define the material. There needs to be visibility of the suppliers and subcomponent materials of construction, details to the level of the exact resin used to produce the component. As an aside, many times we have gone to the expense of multiple extractable studies on components, and not knowing the same material, plastic resin grade, has been previously been used and accepted. Historically, with the stainless steel tank, we have all the information on every tank. We control the validation, and during the operation, we monitor each clean. With single-use systems, we're reliant on the supplier to provide the equivalent controls. As biopharma companies, we're doing aseptic processing. We need to have complete control of the supplier's environment. Whatever we do for our stainless steel tanks, we need the supplier to do the same in their manufacturing facilities. The supplier is now an extension of our operations. Okay, comparing of a stainless steel tank to a single-use assembly, we find that there are many commonalities. Materials of construction. For a stainless steel tank, we have notebooks filled with exact composition of each piece of steel that has been used or welded for the tank. In the case of single-use, there sometimes may be some mystery because there's only a generic polymer grade listed on the bill of material, not an exact resin grade. For example, we have many information often talks about being able to get this information, and it is important as we move forward. Extractables are conducted for both stainless steel and single-use assemblies. As stainless steel is well accepted, plastics are deemed to have more unacceptable extractable entities. But they may not be the case. This may not be the case. Understanding the use of plastics in the world of biopharma is relatively new, and extractable studies will continue until there's more understanding of critical components used in drug substance and product with interaction of additives used in polymeric material. As new cell lines are created, the interactions may be different with specific plastic resin grades, and there could be subtle levels of ingredients in the plastic resin that could affect the interaction of drug substance or other entities stored in the bag. As you can see with engineering reliability, both we need to make sure that we have cleanliness with the stainless steel tank and the sterilization validation of the single-use assembly. For measurement of bioburden, GOC and endotoxin are important. Knowing bioburden and endotoxin for single-use assembly assures us that we can release the single-use assembly off of the CVA and not have to have any additional testing. Environmental monitoring of the stainless steel tank and single-use assembly. While additional monitoring must be done by the supplier to ensure that the sterilization validation continues to be valid in between the dose audit evaluation, this ensures the control is in place to catch any changes between audits. Having a clear understanding of the materials and the process used to manufacture the film used in the bag is essential. For multi-layer films, for example, it is important for the end users to be able to understand the physical, chemical properties of each layer used to form the film. For example, the film must meet USP Class 6. To ensure the entity of the film fluid contact layer, there needs to be an FTIR, as you can see, a spectrum provided by the supplier. The supplier should be checking for each lot, documenting the film fluid contact layer is the same composition for each lot. The health agencies expect us as end users to be able to identify the exact material construction of the fluid contact surface. There is no testing done by the end users anymore, and therefore it is expected by the supplier to be checking and confirming that each film lot has the same composition, and there is no change in the FTIR identity test. If there is no understanding of film composition, then the implementation of single use can become difficult. Material film properties of supplier. Chemical compatibility is important. It provides the initial evaluation if the film can be used for storage of specific solutions. Physical properties provide us indication of how the film will perform in various conditions of use. Also, temperature performance is important, where bags will be used for freezing or 2 to 8 degrees environment, where the film may be more brittle than at ambient temperature. Extractables. These extractables are typically run with model solvent systems. Now, with the introduction of the BPOG model solvent protocol, this allows end users to compare film extractable performance. This protocol has helped end users in spending less time and money for extractable studies for each film, thus reducing the lead times in implementation. Tubing and components are ongoing in this type of extractable study. These extractable results are critical to determining product safety, and specific calculations are done to show that the overall contribution of the bag extracts to the drug product. End users must approve the extracts of the bag do not pose a risk to the patient. This is done by measuring the extracts from the bags and calculating base average dosage for the patient. Sterilization validation. All SUTs are sterilized. They must meet ISO 11347. As part of this validation, dose mapping must be done at the sterilization site to ensure that the level of radiation meets the validated range. Further dose audits must be conducted on a quarterly basis to ensure that assemblies continue to meet the SLA, or sterilization assurance level, 10 to the minus 6. Environmental monitoring must be conducted on a regular basis. Particle counts at least once a week, non-viables as well. This ensures that any changes in levels between the dates of the dose audits will be found and can be corrected prior to any issue arise in the dose audit. Now we're going to speak about finally we're going to look at the elements that end users need to ensure to meet the agency expectations and can manufacture our products with confidence. We understand that suppliers are not processing aseptically. However, we use the products in an aseptic process with no prior cleaning. This means it's critical for our suppliers' clean rooms classification meets and needs of the end user application. Also, both viable and non-viable particles must be monitored. This way, one can demonstrate that the sterilization validation remains acceptable and meets the SLA of 10 to the minus 6. Supplier clean room controls are critical. They help the end user know that the single-use assemblies that are received are non-pyrogenic. Supplier gowning practices is also very critical. Gowning must cover the individual to avoid any exposure to outside cloning inside the clean rooms. Gloves must be worn, hands washed, sanitized before putting on gloves. Bioburden can be transferred to single-use assemblies by cleanroom staff during assembly, raising the endotoxin level of single-use systems. It is also important to sample gowns and gloves for bioburden after use, especially during the initial training of individuals in the gowning process. Eye protection is necessary to catch possible eyelashes from falling into single-use assemblies. And at the end, gowning plays an important role in substantiating the sterilization validation of the single-use assembly, and the bioburden levels will be controlled through appropriate gowning practices. The single-use validation studies. As we move forward, closing the process becomes significantly easier. This can be done by using aseptic connectors and tubing welding. To do this, aseptic connectors have to be validated using appropriate microbial challenges to demonstrate the robustness of the connector. It is also important for the supplier to evaluate connectors in bioprocess conditions that they may be used in. Equipment such as welders need a combination of supplier and end-user validation. The supplier provides an understanding on how the welder performs, then this needs to be combined with an end-user validation in conditions and applications that it will be used. Both studies, connector and welder, provide data to prove that aseptic connections are being made in our GMP environment or even possible in a lower classification area. Engagement testing is needed to make sure connections between a hose bar and connection tubing will not fail under pressure. The end user needs to understand that the pressures might be experienced by the single-use assembly in the worst case scenario, and it is important to discuss it with the supplier in the correct component and tubing combination. Air leak testing should be performed over an extended period to give time for the leaks to develop, and in a similar test, stainless steel tank connections that have been welded are tested. When we do this, we use pressures several factors greater than the normal stress test. But you have to be careful with single-use assemblies that the pressure rating of the tubing is not exceeded. As most connections are made manually, they are technique dependent, which is why it's important for end users to understand how the operators are qualified and their techniques to do these skills. In stainless steel tanks, welders are certified. It is important to understand the force to pulling off, and up here you see a tensile tester, which is a machine that can help you measure the force to pull off tubing. This is something that should be looked at. Leaks are not acceptable in our operations, and the cost of leak investigations can be very large. So it is very important to do this type of testing with the supplier. Finally, key elements of assembly process. Environmental monitor, as we've spoken about before. QC release testing, how samples are tested for bioburden, LAL, particulate, and also visual criteria. Documentation, to ensure that we have complete traceability of the assembly to the original plastic resin used to produce such critical parts in the assembly. If there's ever a need for an investigation, having this understanding means that the end user will be able to easily, with the supplier, to understand what might have gone wrong and how that they might be impacted in the manufacture of drug substance or drug product. Finally, the engineering reliability must be evaluated at each process step. As the product moves downstream, the criticality of existing requirement increases and new requirements may be prior. With the addition of for example, as many of you know, with the addition of chemically derived medias and the manipulation of cell line, effects can be seen in a specific film system. This has been discussed in in two papers by Hammond et al. From Amgen and Wood et al. From Genentech. The findings showed that degradation of antioxidant product hindered cell growth and thus affected the process. The film was used for several years, but there was an issue that was magnified, with the change of the media, caused the process and cell growth to be affected. Going forward, increasing this level of understanding will be necessary with films used in processing of specific cell lines and process steps. There is no difference from what took place with cleaning agents used in stainless steel tanks and their effect on the process step. So it's important that the end user and supplier continue to work closely to understand the additives and effects of the process fluids used in single-use assemblies. If this work doesn't continue, this will also limit the use of single-use, and we will stay with single-use stainless steel tanks. What has been done in the industry to bridge the end user requirements with the suppliers, Two groups, the Biopharma Operations Group, BPOG, and BPSA, have gotten together and introduced a URS template and worked together to try to resolve how we can improve this communication. And this has been done. The problem, as we said, what are the implementation of single-use in GMP operations? What are the gaps and expectations between the users and suppliers? And the proposed solution was, let's equip the industry with a common tool to be able to, with a clear, consistent communication between the end user and the supplier's capability. And this was done per ASTM E3051. This standard is used for the biopharmaceutical process equipment users requirement. And the URS was based on this ASTM standard. One important thing that was found by working together with the supplier, the end users realized there are many groups within their company that needs to come together to ensure that we have the proper requirements that we are going to tell the supplier. And this is given through the URS document. And then the supplier also realized that there is, to be able to respond to the end user, they must form cross-functional teams within their organization. The technical diligence documents are lists of questions per each user requirement that has been created by 40 different biopharma companies. So this is a collection of all the questions we've ever had that we've asked the supplier, and it's been all put together into one of these documents. So the supplier is going to be asked the questions in a consistent manner. And so this should speed up the response to the end user of our questions. So as I mentioned, there are three tools that have been developed: the URS template to be able to communicate our requirements, a supply chain template, which is a memo that lists the bill of materials part numbers with the sub-supplier, manufacturer, and the sub-supplier's manufacturing code and the resin grade. So we have complete understanding of the supply chain. And also the technical diligence template, which I spoke about. These are the lists of questions that can be used by the end user to ask the supplier. So what is the key takeaway from this talk? I'm sorry. I have operational issues with that. What are the key takeaways from this talk? You know there's a common road for quality design, both for a single-use system and for a stainless steel system. Materials, understanding engineer reliability, and understanding the supplier's capability and their reliability of their sub-suppliers. Also, we've given an overview of the critical GMP requirements for the single-use system, and also to ensure global regulatory compliance. This can be done by the validation approaches, the environmental monitoring, practices for engagement qualifications, and transparencies for the supply chain, and the shared vision on how we are going to adopt single-use. Ongoing work is the implementation of the BPOG extractables protocol, and finally, the end-user template and supply chain memo and the diligence documents. I'd like to acknowledge a few groups of people who I've worked with, and finally, thank you for your time. And my colleague, Helen, will now speak.
Thank you, Trishna. Once again, I would like to remind our viewers that there will be a live questions and answer session at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to send in your questions at any time during the presentation via the Questions tab located at the right-hand side of your screen, and we will go through these at the end of the presentation. Now, please allow me to introduce our second presenter, Dr. Helen Porra. Dr. Pora is the Vice President of Technical Communication and Regulatory Strategy at Pall Biotech. Dr. Pora has the global responsibility for the marketing and development of Pall single-use technologies. She has been instrumental in the development of Pall single-use technology for the last 20 years. She is as well heavily involved in quality and regulatory aspects of single-use technology. Helen has over 30 years of experience working in the biopharmaceutical industry, and the last 26 years has been within Pall Corporation. She speaks regularly at conferences about single-use technology with a strong focus on validation and overall process integration aspects. She is as well involved in different working groups in the industry involved in standards development and is on the board of BPSA and SUTAP. Welcome, Helen.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you, Trishna, for paving the road. So the subject of my presentation is going to be, I think, a nice link to what Trishna has been really presenting. And I would like to speak about how, as a supplier, we've been looking at driving quality and responsiveness in single-use technology. So let's look at what are the challenges in single-use technology. I think Trishna made a very good road to it. I mean, obviously, there is a lot of question around quality, a lot of question around supply chain. Then I would say there is a number of aspects about shared risk. And to some extent, I think that we have to look at the shared risk in terms of shared responsibility. And as that was laid out before, the fact that as you move to, I would say, former type of manufacturing, which was heavily built on stainless steel, to now more single-use. Basically, I mean, a lot of the responsibility has shifted from the end user to the supplier. So as a result of this, we have really a duty to ensure that we have some kind of really taking and understanding all the responsibility which is associated to it. So what I would like to describe in the next kind of 20 minutes is how, as a company, we have really developed a unique approach and a proprietary tool to really drive, that aspect by looking at quality by design, and then as well accelerate rationalization and responsiveness, because again, in, I would say, audit situation and so on, we need to be some kind of really quick about looking at it. So how did we look at the problem, and how did we look at what should be the quality by design and what could be the approach to this? So if we look at what we have to do and supply single-use system to our end users, there is, I would say, three aspects to it that we have spent time on it. The first one is linked to the component selection. And really, Trishna mentioned a lot of aspects to it related to the validation. And then I think that the other thing that I want to discuss as well is what about sourcing? And particularly a very important aspect is what about robust data storage? Then, obviously, there is the whole project review and ensuring that everything is fit for purpose. And at the end, remember that we are assembling components and so on, so we need to ensure that, all our manufacturing is, I would say, fully validated, linked to the assembly process, obviously, the suitability of the sterilization process, and I go back to a robust data storage. So what did we do in our company to look at this? Basically, there was one time when we looked at how the business was really developing, the amount of data that we had to look at and so on, we felt that, I would say, the old way of doing it, there was no way that it could be sustainable. So what we did as a company is that we developed a single application where we ensure that that would be the repository of all our design and component information, and that's what we call the Allegro Frontal Management System that you can see on the left-hand side of the screen. Basically, I will go through the main modules of that system and will explain you how it does guide our people to the highest level of validation, how we have looked at standardization and look at preferred component usage and what is the benefit of it. And then, you are going to understand how we support the documentation for all the systems that we deliver, that all the suppliers and components are fully approved, that all the joints are fully validated. That's the validation of the assembly process, and how do we ensure that everything which is delivered is suited for the application. What we've done is that we have developed this online system, and what is really important is that the information is always up to date. There is no replica of anything in any server or any computer. We fully control the information. That's very important. And then, particularly when you look at the amount of information that we have to store, we never duplicate any piece of information to ensure that, once we update anything, it's done once for all. So let's look at the different parts of it. And the first one I'm going to have a look at is what we call the part modules. So basically what it is a segment of this application where basically all the information for our component is stored in one place. And we believe that standardization, is one way to go, and it starts at the component level. So basically, what we do is that we clearly indicate for every component what is the status. And as you will see in the next slide, basically the way we look at it is that we have a strong preference for looking at preferred components, and you will understand what it does mean. So how does it work? Once we have to select a component, it goes to supplier approval. That works for, obviously, when we are using components that we have to source from a third-party player, which I have to say is frequent in our world because you don't have any supplier who does every component. So basically, in our case, we would have to source, for example, tubing. We would have to source some type of fittings and so on. Then once the supplier is approved, then we move to the component approval. Then, once we approve it, we weigh the component. And then, we have to do the joint testing to ensure that the validation will be fully done for the assembly process. You will see that all the information is stored in HTMS, and obviously for the Pall product that we manufacture ourselves, you can find all the specification on our website. So how does the display look like? So here, I'm giving you an example where basically I'm looking at the tubing. So you see that there is different type of information. One important one is the component category. And basically the component category is going to drive what is going to be a standardized component description, which is extremely important to ensure that we have one component only once in the system. And then, ultimately you see that you will have the component status. And basically, this is what we use in terms of driving rationalization. So probably your question is, okay, what do you mean by preferred component? So let's look at what we mean by this. Really, what we mean by a preferred component means that we are driving our end user to the highest level of quality and certification attributes. For example, here, I'm showing you a tubing, and you see that there is an enormous amount of data information and quality information pertaining to that component. And that's a solid base for us to say that component is going to be preferred, which means as well, from a logistic point of view, that the component is going to be in stock. It means as well then that it means that the lead time of the system, which is going to be manufactured with only preferred components, is going to be reduced a lot, and we are doing then and looking at 4 weeks lead time using that approach. So the other thing is, Trishna made it very well. We need to be really clear about, what are the compliance requirements in terms of the every system, but you have to understand that, the options for the bill of material for every system is some kind of almost unlimited. So what we are doing is that because of how the system is being labeled, basically we are capable of editing compliance table reports, and we can fully automate the system. Basically, what you do is that you insert your component bus number coming from the bill of material of the system. This does allow us to create the tables. I give you an example here with 3 different components, where basically it means that in a second, internally we are capable of creating that type of compliance report, which means as well that the data are always up to date. All the data are very easily auditable, and through this we are able to streamline our communication to the end user, and we believe that responsiveness is an essential criteria for success. Then, Trishna, mentioned the fact that there is a need as well for standardized approach. One of which that she didn't mention, but that has been extremely important in our industry, is how do we characterize better our components, and basically can we look at a standardized set of extractable data. And this was an effort, which was driven again by Biotech, and basically they issued the testing guidelines toward the suppliers. And that's an activity that we've been performing very diligently in our company. And basically, as a result of this, for numerous components that we are manufacturing, we've been generating all the reports alongside the guidelines from Biotech. And you will find very detailed reports. What do we do, and what is the link again with the ACMS database, is the fact that when you look at a given component, basically the extractable information is again hosted on the ACMS database. So it means that it's very easily extracted. It can be very easily extracted. And as an example, I'm using here one of our filters, and basically you see that the information related to the extractable will be part of it, and we will treat similarly information related to extractable from components that we may source from a third party. So now let's move to the manufacturing of single-use systems. One of the things which is very important, we mentioned, everything related to the component information, but one of the key aspects then about the reliability of the overall system is to ensure that you have a validated assembly process. And obviously, as a company, we take a lot of attention to this. And what we do, and I will go more in describing it, is that we test every joint, and we do it pre and post gamma, and then we store all the results in the ICMS database, as I'm going to describe in the next slide. So basically, that's how you look at it. That there is a specific module in our database which we call joint test. And basically, in that module, we store all the information pertaining to any joint test that we've been doing. And that will, as well, allow us to do automatic checks when we are designing the system, that basically all the junctions have been tested and have been approved for use in a manifold design. And as a result of this, we don't rely on some kind of any human person making the checks and checking whether component A and component B can be jointed together. So let's look at how it looks like in real life. So when I go to that module, and if I look at the data sheet for example, a given tube, you see here that it's being displayed all the components against which it has been tested. You see that the testing is relevant because it doesn't always pass. And then basically, if I click on one of the components, it's going to tell me here is the test number for that given component. Then I can get all the information and look at what has been the test pre-gamma, getting all the information pertaining to that test. Then I can get all the information related to the test post-gamma. And as a result of this, you can see that, basically, we can display in a very short amount of time all the information and we understand all the path limits and so on, and this is subsequently used in terms of design criteria. So what are really the benefits of the HMS as we are starting to grasp them? Is basically, as you can see, we are capable of installing all the information for all the components in one place. Basically, we have thousands of specifications which are stored in that place. We use this as a way to clearly label, the components according to their status, and this allows us to drive, I would say, standardization, responsiveness, and quality. And basically, the database does allow us to really control introduction of any new parts and so on. And you can, I hope I'm convincing you that then the data are extremely transparent. We can show them to you anytime is needed. So how do we link this then to a customer inquiry? So basically, that's the other part of the module. And basically, what we do to this is that it does allow us to really store any information related to any inquiry we are getting from a customer. And basically, does allow us to ensure system will be fit for purpose and then, demonstrate the full traceability of our approval process internally from all stakeholders. How does it look like, in a typical project flow? So the first thing we will look at is we will ask you quite a lot of details around the project. And basically, the reason why we ask all these details around the project, around the application, is not out of sheer curiosity, but it's because basically we want to ensure that the proposed solution is going to be fit for purpose. So as you can see, there is quite a lot of review, whether it's technical review, whether it's manufacturing approval, and obviously what is very important is the customer acceptance. How do I link this to what Trishna was mentioning before? Obviously there is a very, I would say, narrow link, with the single-use user requirement group work, which has been task-led by BPOG and BPSA. And you see that, we are exactly using a similar sort of process to what has been done, and we fully document it in our database. So what is the next stage? Obviously, once you know what your end user wants, basically the next thing you need to do is you need to design the system. And basically what we have is in our database, we have a drawing module. And what does it allow us to do is obviously to produce all the design, but you will see that there is a lot of quality built in terms of looking at generating, the bill of material, in terms of having the automatic joint verification, and basically, again, avoiding any type of duplication. So basically, what are the key points around that module, which again is a proprietary design tool for us, is we put in the process specification, and what it will do is that it will automatically ensure that any components that we are picking in order to design the system are basically meeting the process specification. I'm, for example, speaking about temperature and pressure. And then as you try to put together the components, it will automatically tell you, yes, this joint has been validated, or no, that joint has not been validated. And then it will trigger to generate the joint testing. Basically, the way it does work is that we will not be capable of issuing a final drawing until all the joints have been fully validated. It's a global system as well. So basically, it drives for a lot of, I would say, consistency. All the people who are using the tool are fully trained. And the system does allow us as well to generate automatically the bill of material, and showing as well again that there is no error. And then, we have put kind of, I would say, lots of a searching function into it with the way that we do our part number structure. And basically, it does allow us to find any type of design for our end users. And, let's say that site A, has, ordered 2 years ago a design, for example, which would contain a 200-liter biocontainer plus a given filter. And site B say, I would like to have a design which has similar features, but, could we know whether in our own company we have already done it? We can do it, and that's another way to drive standardization and avoid, I would say, multiplication of unnecessary part numbers. So in overall, what have we done to this is basically, I mean, it does allow us to have a fully validated single-use solution. So if I look and start from what we call the ACMS, basically this is all the quality by design. And I've shown you, what does the component validation module means, what the joint validation module means, what is the inquiry register, what is the configurator, and you really get a very good grasp about how they are all linked together and how do they allow us to ensure that, I mean, there is no caveat in our approach. I mean, obviously, a lot of other things were mentioned by Trishna before, things around sterility. How do you claim sterility? How do you look at cleanliness, and basically compliance to USP 85 and 78.8, respectively for particulates and for endotoxin and particulates. Then, I mean, all critical components are tested at 100%. All systems are inspected by independent operators. Now you have as well the possibility using even more advanced techniques to do integrity testing to a very fine level. All our manufacturing rooms are class 10,000 in operation to ensure cleanliness. And then, I mean, once everything has been assembled, you will get the batch documentation that you need. There is the possibility, I mean, for a certain system which sizes is inferior or equal to 200 liters for very critical application to do point of use testing. And I think that as we speak about quality by design and quality in general, there is something that we should not forget at all, is the importance of operator training in that industry and in single use, because there is a lot of manual handling. So this is as well a key requirement, and as a supplier, we have a duty to support the end user to that type of activity. So in conclusion, I think that the ACMS, or Allegro Central Management System, has numerous benefits. I mean, obviously, all the data are recorded on one live system, which means that the information is always accurate, always available where people are sitting in the world. We have a very strict approval process because with that type of system, I mean, obviously, the information is always as good as you are controlling the introduction of it. And we have extremely comprehensive search functionality, and that does allow us really to drive, I would say, rationalization and to drive responsiveness. So if I look at it, what does it mean as well is that it does allow us to design systems which are totally fit for purpose. It's very important to have all these quality by design aspects, which drive very consistent quality. And then we have a responsibility in terms of responsiveness. So we look at how can we shorten our process internally, how can we ensure more reliable delivery, and how we can ensure, which is extremely important in that field, security of supply. So with this, I would like to conclude my talk. And I want particularly to thank Peter Hiskey and his team because they are instrumental in the development of the ACMS. It's a continuously ongoing activity, and they are doing an extremely good job at supporting that activity as well. So with this, I think that we are ready to take questions.
Thank you, Helen. Now we will begin the question and answer segment of the webinar. Once again, I would like to remind the audience that you can still send your questions via the questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen. The first question is, how do you respond to health agency auditors when they are not familiar with single-use systems? Trishna?
First, you must clearly specify what the system is, how you audit your suppliers, and also comparing it to your stainless steel tank, the cleaning validations. There are acceptance criteria that you have set with the cleaning validations of your stainless steel tank. This can be compared to the single-use release criteria. Also, explaining what it does. It eases the cleaning. It removes the cleaning. It removes the possibility of cross-contamination, all those things that we have seen with stainless steel tanks. This can be clearly listed out in all the other requirements.
Thank you, Trishna. How do you ensure the information on ACMS is always available? Helen?
Yes, so basically, I mean, what we've done is that there is a lot of security about how the system is operating. It's located in the cloud with several backups and so on. So as a result of this, we can never, have any shortage of information. And we did this as a capital point to answer our end user requirements.
Thank you. How do you respond to health agency auditors when they ask how you justify the release of single-use systems, in bracket assemblies, just by certificate of acceptance release? Trishna?
So based on the talk that I gave today, understanding the materials of construction, understanding your supplier's capability, all the controls that they have in place, auditing your suppliers, and all the validation work that has been done at the suppliers and the continual sterilization dose audits, the performance and the qualification that you did when you implemented this single-use assembly, that you can show that the performance of the supplier with the process and all the QC controls that you have for the process fluids that you're testing along the lines. This should be able to ensure that you have full understanding, also the controls, quality agreements that you have with the supplier, specifications, because single-use should be considered as a raw material or direct material, and it will have controlled specifications and requirements that you have signed with the suppliers.
Thank you, Trishna. As an end user, can I have access to ACMS? Helen?
Yes. The answer is not no at the moment. I mean, basically, it's an internal Pall tool, but as you can see, it's been designed to ensure that the communication of information to the end user is seamless.
Thank you. Please define or reference GMP standards for single-use system manufacturing, for example, GMP manufacturing environment. Who would like to answer this question?
I can answer the question. So in single-use, there are no standards set in place, but for most part, single-use assemblies are treated like a medical device. So, and many of the suppliers claim that they're CGMP, and Helen can sort of assure me this or not. So there must be a level, it's the clean room. It's the cleanliness of the clean room, the control of the viables, non-viables, having the documentation, the traceability of all of the things used in your assemblies, the labeling of the products, because these are sterile products that come to you from the sterilizer, the certification, all those items that you need to ensure for good manufacturing practices, assuring that you have qualified operators, qualified personnel, the maintenance of the clean room, the maintenance of the equipment, validations, all the things that we do typically when we run in a GMP environment are used for single use.
Thank you. What is a GMP environment? Is there a clean room classification?
I think that, there is, I will take it a little bit, maybe Trishna. I think that that's where there is a little bit some subtle difference, is that we have to act in very clear condition as a supplier to allow our end users to really fully meet CGMP. But people always have to remember that as supplier, we are not regulated by the authority. So there's a little bit some kind of a cascade effect. But obviously, I mean, when you look at clean room environment, we do it against standard, you know, I mean, there are ISO standards for this. So as Trishna was making it really clear in her presentation, basically, as much as possible, when we can, we try to refer all the activities we are doing against existing standards, if any, or, I mean, yes, try to relate them, because the difficulty is that there are not yet specific standards for single use. So things are always a little bit a question of interpretation, but we do our best as suppliers for this. And then I think that it's very important. I mean, as Trishna was mentioning, there is an enormous amount of collaboration going in the industry through different organizations, and you can name them, you know, such as BPSA, such as BPOG. Then you have as well standard setting organizations like ASTM and ASME-BPE, for example. So there is a lot of efforts, I mean, I would say driving in the right direction and ensuring that there is a good understanding and I would say more standardized approach in the future.
Thank you. Before I finish the webinar, I would like to ask our presenters, Dr. Trishna Ray-Chaudhuri and Dr. Helen Porra, if they have any closing remarks.
My closing remarks. My goal today was to provide you with information to implement seamlessly single-use systems, and I hope I have given you that, and be able to address any questions that may be asked during a health agency audit. I believe that one day we will see the Flex Factory of the future with the deployment of such systems which will make drugs available to patients anywhere in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chaudhuri. Dr. Pora, do you have any closing remarks?
Yes, I think that in addition to what Trishna has just mentioned, I would like to say that I think that suppliers, we have a very clear understanding about where our responsibility and what I would say we owe to our end users, but I would say as well to the patient, because, I mean, as a result of everything, I would say patient safety is what matters in the end. And I really want to demonstrate that as a supplier, we take our responsibility very seriously, whether it's by building the appropriate system, and we believe that the ACMS that we have showed you is one way to do it. And the other thing is as well by being extremely collaborative with the end users and as well with our partner suppliers, because it's an industry where I would say the partnership extends quite a lot between suppliers and end users. So I think that collaboration is essential and we are taking it very seriously.
Thank you, Dr. Pora. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our presenters, Dr. Trishna Ray-Chaudhuri and Dr. Helen Porra, for sharing their knowledge with us. I would like to remind our audience that they can view this webinar on demand by visiting biopharma-asia.com. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.